Did AMD really just blacklist Gamers Nexus from review samples? Possibly. More on that in a minute. However, there's a lot of other topics we'll be talking about today as well. You can check the timestamps in the video description if you're interested in any of these particular topics. I'm actually going to start here. Now, I've been seeing some comments saying that like NVIDIA's path tracing just got 2 to 3 times faster with just a software update, not even needing new hardware. So I wanted to figure out where's this coming from. You can see headlines like this. And so to be clear, this is actually all coming from a research paper. I'm about to like flashbang you, white background, watch out, because it's from a white paper. So here's a research paper that NVIDIA has published, and it is pretty interesting, giving examples of like the original Restir path tracing taking 37.1 milliseconds to compute this frame versus the new enhanced version only taking 12.6 milliseconds, and they're actually claiming that it is not just as good, but potentially even actually better quality and much faster. Now, if you're going to read the full research paper, and again, sources will be linked in the video description, you are more than welcome to do so, but keep in mind that if you start diving too deep, you will start seeing math expressions, which I think could be absolutely fun to take a look at, but maybe not all of you would fully agree. Now, the main idea, if you want just kind of the summary in plain language, although still somewhat technical, of how are they getting the improved performance is basically just looking at a bunch of optimizations that can produce the same or better output with just a much faster compute time. Specifically, having shift mapping cost in spatial reuse by reciprocal neighbor selection, new ray footprint thresholds that adapt to scene and materials, reducing correlation artifacts by sampling duplication maps, improving quality and cost by unifying Restir for direct and indirect light, and other optimizations that boost performance and improve robustness by reducing color and disocclusion noise. In other words, lots of good stuff that all sounded pretty technical. You could check out these sections for more details, again, if you're pretty technically minded. But I think for most of us, just in the like, I'm a gamer, what does this mean for me stage, I would say that it's possible that in the future, path tracing could be more performant. Now, I'm hoping that all of this can be like somewhat, vendor agnostic and just improve research on path tracing performance for all GPUs and all of that. I'm a little bit annoyed still with some of the more, vendor-locked path tracing implementations that we've seen, but we do need AMD to be moving their feature set forward as well, to be fair, to have, their ray regeneration in more games, and it'd be nice if it was more of a unified upsample and denoiser, etc. So, in other words, like there's some rightful criticism of vendor locking certain graphics settings like path tracing in recent releases, but AMD does kind of need to get their stuff out there as well. Now, on that note, although not path tracing specific, there is some evidence that AMD may be about to get a multi-frame generation version out there. Now, the evidence for this seems to be coming from the Fidelity FX SDK, referencing something about ratios for frame generation. So frame generation ratios. And that's described as the AMD Fidelity FX frame generation upgrade ratio option is a feature that allows users to select the desired frame generation ratio for optimal performance and visual quality. This sounds a lot like allowing you to go beyond 2x to 3x or 4x. Now, one thing that would be interesting is if AMD did something more like lossless scaling, which allows non-integer multiples. No idea if that'll be the case here. But this could be something that we'll see soon, but we don't have it yet. So maybe people are making a bunch of big deal out of something that ends up taking a long time to come to pass for an actual product release. Now, on the note of multi-frame generation, NVIDIA's DLSS SDK has now been updated on GitHub to include DLSS frame generation 5x and 6x modes, as well as the dynamic mode. So basically what this means for gamers is that game developers can now more easily directly integrate the dynamic dynamic multi-frame generation into games rather than rely so much on the Nvidia app, just upgrading previous versions to the newer version. So it's nice that the app lets you do that, but it's even nicer when a game integrates it directly for convenience. Now let's get to the, so did AMD blacklist Gamers Nexus? So this video popped up today when the review embargo lifted for AMD's 9950X3D2 CPUs. Now, if you look at a site like videocards.com, which generally does a review roundup where you can find all of the reviews for a product like this, you can see that the list is a lot shorter than usual, meaning it's not just Gamers Nexus who didn't get a review sample out of big outlets that are generally sampled, big new CPU releases. Videocards.com is specifically highlighting others like computer-based Tech Power Up, Hardware Lux, eTechnics, PC Watch, and others are generally part of this kind of review cycle. So there's the question on, okay, so was Gamers Nexus specifically targeted? Well, like I said, there are definitely other outlets who usually get review samples for this kind of thing and didn't. That being said, Gamers Nexus is by far one of the largest review outlets that reviews CPUs. So them being left off the list after having done some pieces regarding AMD on a more political side of things, talking about lobbying, etc. And Gamers Nexus has gone in that direction a lot more frequently. Like, they still do review computer products, but if you have followed Gamers Nexus's general video output for a while now, they certainly have had a lot more content that touches on, the political aspects of some companies, etc., ethics, all kinds of things kind of beyond the scope of a typical hardware review. And so Gamers Nexus is pointing out that it's kind of suspicious that right after they did a big piece like that about AMD kind of stopped responding to their emails, and then they kind of started getting their press release stuff from a third party that works with AMD on press briefings rather than AMD directly, which seems to be how Gamers Nexus used to interact with them. And then they didn't get this major sample. So that all does certainly sound suspicious, especially for a site as large as Gamers Nexus, especially when they're talking about it's not just not getting the review sample, it's also that they're just not getting replies to any simple emails regarding drivers, etc. You could watch this full video. Again, all my sources will be in the video description. So if you want my opinion on are they getting blacklisted by AMD, I would say, well, if it was just not getting the review sample, there are a lot of other sites that seem to have not gotten this particular review sample. So that's less suspicious, but the fact that also they were getting more kind of ghosted in their emails, their contact at AMD seems to have changed. It certainly indicates at least a less friendly relationship with AMD. So it'll be interesting to see if other future products, get review samples for Gamers Nexus or not, or if them calling out AMD like this changes anything. So it's certainly suspicious, but I will say that because other hardware reviewers that normally would get something like this didn't, it's at least less of a just obvious blacklisting specifically for what Gamers Nexus did, but Gamers Nexus is also an absolutely huge review site, so it's extremely odd that they would be left out of a major review like this for no reason. Now, how are the 9950X3D2 reviews playing out? And just as a general reminder, this is a $900 MSRP CPU, which just adds the 3D V-cache to both CCDs instead of one, which was the case with the 9950X3D. And there's also the 9950, which just doesn't have 3D V-cache. Now, I would encourage you to check out these actual full reviews. That being said, there's two places you could look at a CPU like this. There's the gaming side of things, and there is the productivity side of things. Now, on the productivity side, if we check out something like PC Games Hardware, and we look at a productivity benchmark, I'll just show one of them. They tested out a bunch of others. you can see that there are some things like 7-zip that do benefit by a few percent. We're talking small single-digit performance gains over the 9950X3D. Whereas if we check out for gaming, and I'll use a different reviewer for this one, if we take a look at something like Hardware Unboxed for gaming, some games show basically no performance gain, and that's generally the overall average, is basically no performance gain. Again, you can check out these full reviews for a lot more examples of games and productivity, but basically you're paying a lot more money for very little additional performance. So it's kind of an interesting CPU, and it is technically better than what was out there before, but it's difficult to point out any applications where it would be a meaningful performance gain considering the price that you're getting. And for gaming, it certainly does not seem to be worth it. Now, on the Intel CPU side of things, Intel has hinted that their budget CPUs will be unlocked in the future, at least more of them will be. By unlocked, we mean supporting overclocking. AMD has, for a long time, been a lot better about supporting overclocking on all of their chips, whereas Intel often had certain more expensive models have overclocking available, while the less expensive models did not. Now, the overall quote here from Robert Halleck of Intel is that what you will see is more and more unlocked SKUs over time. That is the goal. That should not be a feature that is exclusively reserved for the people paying the most amount of money. Not everyone can afford the most amount of money, and that doesn't make them any less enthusiastic than the person who can spend $500 on a CPU. They are still PC enthusiasts, and they deserve the same level of features, and that is what we intend to deliver on our roadmap. So that's good. It's nice to hear that they're going to start unlocking the less expensive models of CPUs and all that. Speaking of some things being too expensive, the rumors were true. Xbox Game Pass prices have been lowered. There had been rumors that the new Xbox CEO had decided that Game Pass was too expensive, and they have now acted on this. This is official, not rumor, directly from Xbox.com, saying that starting today, Game Pass Ultimate has dropped from $29.99 to $22.99 per month. And on the PC side of things, PC Game Pass has dropped from $16.49 to $13.99 per month, although various region pricing can vary. Now, one of the big changes with this price reduction is that Call of Duty, at least future titles, will no longer be day one Game Pass at launch. However, they are saying that they will eventually come to Game Pass about a year later. So a lot of people had speculated that the reason behind Game Pass becoming a lot more expensive was that they were trying to include Call of Duty in with it as a day one title for Game Pass. They didn't want to lose money on Call of Duty, so, well, let's jack up the price of Game Pass. Didn't seem like that played out super well from like Call of Duty sales, as well as I haven't seen any official numbers on this, but just anecdotal evidence certainly seemed to suggest that a lot of people saw the jump to $30 a month as a good time to unsubscribe from Game Pass. So when a business is deciding, did the price increase make sense on our streaming service or any kind of subscription, is, okay, you could lose some number of users, but if your price increase retained enough users to be overall a net benefit to your profit and you still saw some growth, you might stick with it. I would say this reduction might be an indication that they saw enough users leave the service, or maybe saw at least a lack of ability to grow the service after the price increase, being something that didn't make sense, combined with we threw Call of Duty in there, but then we'd sold fewer, Call of Duty units. Overall, it didn't seem to make financially, it seems like, it makes sense financially. So I think it makes sense to lower the price. Now, have they lowered it enough? Because keep in mind that while this is a price decrease from the huge increase, it was like a 50% increase previously. And now it looks like, if I'm remembering the original prices correctly, this is basically like a $3 a month increase or so compared to where things were before the big 50% price increase that we had seen. You can let me know what you think about all of this in the comments section. Overall, I'm still kind of feeling like, now that I've unsubscribed, because I was one of the people who had unsubscribed when we saw the big price hike, I don't think this has convinced me to resubscribe. Let me know how you feel about it. Now, speaking of Xbox and how it overlaps with PC, remember that Xbox's next version, Project Helix, sounds like it's going to be more like a pre-built gaming PC than previous Xboxes. Whether or not it fully feels like that or not, we'll have to see what it's like when the system actually releases. But there are rumors of ASUS and MSI having their own versions of the next Xbox, Project Helix. That's certainly interesting. Now, originally, we'd seen some discussion based on Kepler L2, who is a well-known hardware leaker, saying that it won't even be sold directly to consumers, presumably by Xbox, but you would be able to buy versions from ASUS, MSI, etc. However, that has been replied to by an official source saying Project Helix will be available as a first-party Xbox console. So, Project Helix will be available first-party from Xbox. However, none of that actually denies that we could also get versions from ASUS or MSI. Now, this also then questions, okay, with leakers, you always have to keep evaluating. Do they seem to have insider info still? Maybe they did in the past. Do they still have it? So interesting that they said it won't be sold directly to consumers, but it seems like it will be. However, that doesn't necessarily mean it won't also be sold as some version by ASUS, MSI, etc. Now, also in the Xbox Helix rumors, Kepler L2 is mentioning things like the GPU will have zero customization this time around. So oftentimes console GPUs use some features of AMD desktop PC GPUs, but they don't necessarily use the whole thing. They might take a little bit of a grab bag and customize some things. For example, like the PlayStation 5 GPU isn't exactly RDNA 2 or RDNA 1. It's kind of like RDNA 1 with some RDNA 2 features. A little bit different than what we see in the PC space. There's no direct analog. So that's certainly an interesting claim. Now, again, this coming from Kepler L2, not an official source, so we always have to go by, grain of salt, that kind of thing. Now, also interesting is some discussion of FSR Diamond. So FSR Diamond has been named as the version of FSR that will be on Project Helix. Now, according to Kepler L2, but again, not official source, that's just a code name for the FSR 5 family of upscaling frame generation and denoising transformer machine learning models that are built for RDNA 5. And claiming that PSSR 3 will just be the same thing with a different name, and presumably FSR 5, again, also the same thing with a different name. Now note, he's also mentioning that it's built for RDNA 5, so that still has that kind of question lingering with all of this for AMD's 9000 series GPUs, the RDNA 4 users. Will the later, RDNA 5 version of FSR be compatible? Will it be backwards compatible with RDNA 4, so AMD's 9000 series users? And one reason that's been called into question is that AMD has still not released FSR 4 machine learning variant for RDNA 2 or 3 users, even though we still have seen the leaked version does work in some usable capacity. So AMD, here's my latest request, that you release FSR 4, or some version of machine learning based upscaling at least, even if you don't brand it as FSR 4, for at least RDNA 3 users, and preferably also RDNA 2. We've seen that some version of it can work. Anyway, with all of this Project Helix discussion, there's some thoughts on, okay, if that's kind of a pre-built gaming system designed to use as a living room console, how about the Steam machine? Well, the Steam machine still appears to be, nowhere in sight as far as the actual release. The latest comment from Valve has been, I think at least within the first half, or maybe it was second half of 2026. Do they reference it in this article? So yeah, still planned in the first half of 2026. So we'll see if that happens. We're getting closer and closer to the end of the first half. But at least the Steam controller, which presumably would be less affected by rising memory costs and SSD costs, which is why they're having issues releasing the Steam machine. But at least the Steam controller is showing signs of a imminent release. Now, it still could be a while, but on Steam Database, there is now a reference to a Steam controller unboxing 2026 video file. So we'll probably be seeing at least an unboxing of the Steam controller soon from Valve. Now, if that unboxing video is posted soon, that would probably mean it's going to be launching soon, but at least the file is now showing up on Steam Database for some kind of unboxing video. Now, also probably relevant to the Steam machine is a low VRAM fix for AMD GPUs on Linux, which has been published by Valve. Now, that's interesting because one of the big criticisms of the Steam machine is 8 gigabytes of VRAM on its GPU. So having some sort of fix to improve the situation in low VRAM scenarios would be good. Now, what this seems to do is just help with prioritization of VRAM allocation between the game that you're running and other tasks a PC does that could allocate some VRAM. And this does a better job of prioritizing the game process when you're limited on VRAM. Now, this has now been tested on a 6500 XT, which is only a 4 gigabyte card, and has apparently shown up to 6.4% performance increase on CachyOS. In some testing here, I saw this at videocards.com, but it looks like they got their source from Notebook Check. And okay, cool. Doesn't sound like dramatic, but sounds absolutely better than nothing. And the latest rumor in the PC space regarding new GPUs is that what is old shall be new again. The RTX 3060 12 gigabyte is still rumored as coming in June. And like, it was never officially completely discontinued or anything, but it's looking like it could be ramping up production again. And this could be instead of an RTX 5050 9 gigabyte, which had been the rumor for the low end. So we'll have to see what happens. This one is coming from Megasize GPU, who is saying RTX 5050 9 gigabyte is delayed. Notice not canceled, but delayed. And the launch becomes pretty uncertain now. So may still release, maybe not. The newly produced RTX 3060 will fill the gap, probably by June. Now, again, this is from Megasize GPU, who is similar to Kepler L2, somebody who has leaked things accurately enough in the past to indicate that they are either within like AIB partners themselves or have contacts with people who are in that space. But again, definitely not official information. We'll have to see what happens. If you were out of the loop on the 5050 9 gigabyte, the idea would be to actually reduce the memory bus, but to switch to 3 gigabyte VRAM modules of GDDR7. The GDDR7 would be faster than the GDDR6 to make up for the reduction in memory bus, so you actually might end up with slightly higher memory bandwidth, not lower, and with one additional gigabyte of VRAM. So, yay? Anyway, the 3060 is slower than a 5050 performance-wise, but if it's the 12 gigabyte version, would have more VRAM. But if memory is expensive, what does that mean for the cost? I know on the used market, these have been one of my recommended GPUs because you can get them for around $200, and they can still play all of the latest games and you don't run into VRAM headaches. So we'll have to see what the new versions charge, because if it's too much, then it's just, too much and not all that interesting. Now, big news in the hardware space is that Tim Cook is no longer going to be the CEO of Apple. However, he will become the executive chairman, while John Turnus will become the Apple CEO. Now, since I mostly focus on gaming PCs, I don't really care, but it's big news, so I'll report it in my hardware news video. In other Mac news, while I'm at it, it's also interesting that Intel versions of Mac processors will no longer be supported after the next update. So macOS 27 will be the end of support for Intel chips on Apple devices. Apple switched to using their own in-house ARM chips quite a while ago now, but so far they have still supported Intel-based Macs with updates. That seems to be finally reaching the end of that era. Last thing I'll mention is a couple of game announcements, with Metro 2039 announced for PS5, Xbox Series S, and PC, apparently launching this winter. Metro series of games have generally pushed PC technology and graphics pretty heavily, and Metro 2039 is likely going to also have some pretty advanced ray tracing features, etc. So I've always liked this series of games just from a gameplay perspective, as well as from a PC like hardware and technology perspective. So that's certainly interesting. And also the long-rumored Assassin's Creed Black Flag remake titled Resynced is now confirmed by Ubisoft, and the reveal planned for April 23rd. So that is coming in soon and has been called the world's worst kept secret. So could be interesting. A lot of people like Black Flag for its pirate game stuff. So we'll have to see what the PC system requirements and graphics look like and all of that. Hopefully you found today's video useful and or interesting, and I hope all of you have an excellent day.